I just want to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors. During my 29 years in corrections, I've used or supervised PEPPERBALL hundreds of times. Now, as a master instructor for PEPPERBALL, I get to teach others about the versatility and effectiveness of the PEPPERBALL system. PEPPERBALL is always the first option in my correctional toolbox because I can quickly go from area saturation to direct impact with the non-lethal PAVA projectiles. And with impact ranges of 0 to 150 feet, PEPPERBALL is perfect for cell extractions or fights on the rec yard. To learn more about PEPPERBALL, go to www.pepperball.com or click the link below in today's show information guide. PEPPERBALL is the safer option first. Well, hello, and welcome back to the Prison Officer Podcast. My guest today has spent a lifetime working in corrections. Percy Pitzer is a retired warden from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. He started with the Bureau of Prisons as a correctional officer in December of 1973 and retired with 25 years of service. He is also the founder of Creative Corrections, which serves local, state, and federal government agencies, offering customized solutions in the capacities of training, advising, professional management, and consulting services, with particular strengths in correctional, law enforcement, rule of law, and judicial systems. They work with people throughout the United States and internationally. In 2012, Percy and his wife started a foundation called the Pitzer Family Education Foundation. And we're going to talk to Percy today and learn about all this stuff. Good morning, Percy. How are you?
And good morning, and I'm happy that you are having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. You have a wealth of correctional knowledge, and we've got years of stuff to talk about, but let's start at the beginning. That's kind of where I like to start. How did you get into corrections?
Well, believe it or not, I was in the military, and my last assignment after leaving Vietnam and Thailand was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I was chasing deserters from the Vietnam War. And I was working with this one sheriff who told me that they're starting a federal prison up in Oxford. And he was thinking about resigning as sheriff and getting a job there. And I said, well, I could get out of the military because I really planned on making a career in the military. I said, but I could get out of the military. Maybe I should get a job. He says, no, they want people with experience. So I thought, well, you son of a gun, I'm going to get me a darn job there. So that's how I started in the Bureau of Prisons. I knew nothing about the Bureau. I heard about Leavenworth. Right. That's about it. But that's how I went to work and got back to Milwaukee. I got on the phone, found out where they was hiring. They was hiring in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I went to work for the Bureau 3 days after I got out of the Army. So, no, I'm sorry. I started in Milan, Michigan.
Milan, Michigan. Okay. So tell me about what was the Bureau like back then? I mean, this was 1973. What level was Milan at that time?
It was probably a low to a medium. The agency was different. I think there was much more accountability than there was now. I think there was they were strict. You were expected to do your job, and if you didn't like it, you left.
Right.
And that's not quite the way it is today as I see it.
Yeah, when I look at some of the historical records for the Bureau, and some of those are like the officers' rules at Alcatraz and stuff like that, and they were very strict. You had a defined uniform, you had a defined job, and you were expected to stick to that. And they even controlled whether or not you drank, in between shifts and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I've seen just looking at the historical records.
Well, we had roll calls. The lieutenant would tell us what's going on or what's not going on, what needs to, what we need to pay attention to, and it was pretty structured.
Yeah.
And we followed the chain of command. I mean, if we had an issue, we went to the lieutenant. We never went to the captain, AW, or the warden. That's just the way it was.
Absolutely.
And I thought that worked pretty well.
Yeah, I think it did too. So what was your first impressions of prison? You said you hadn't worked in one, didn't know anything about it. So you get in there, you get through the academy, and now you're, you're in a housing unit or whatever. What were some of your first impressions of that?
Well, I was a little apprehensive, not knowing what I was getting into, but that apprehension wore off, and I ended up feeling comfortable and proceeded through my career.
Right. So where'd you go from Milan?
Went to Oxford. I took a lateral to Oxford because I'm from Wisconsin, and had I been able to start in Wisconsin, I would have. But Milan was the first place that was hiring, so that's where I went.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I had a wife and a child, so I needed a job. It was very quickly I decided that I was going to make a career out of the Bureau of Prisons. I never ever give it a second thought about quitting or looking for a different career. I mean, I was satisfied with what I had and thought that the advancement would be good. The biggest thing was at that time is putting it bluntly, is doing your job and keep your mouth shut. And the complaining that goes on today would have never happened back then, because it would have not been tolerated.
No, absolutely. It's I don't think people understand how good a job it is sometimes, and even some of us don't understand till we get in there a few years. But I think you're right. I don't think that the complaining was tolerated because there were hundreds of people who were waiting to take your spot, and I think that's part of the difference.
Well, in today, there's a shortage of staff, but you have people, and that's a minority, but you have people on social media telling how terrible it is, and in the next breath complaining because they can't hire anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I don't know how you can expect that to work the way you want to if you're dogging out the agency that gives you a paycheck.
Right. So when did you start thinking about moving up? Where'd you go to next? Did you promote?
Yeah, I went to Miami as a GS8. And I stayed there a couple of years, and then I went to MCC New York as a GS9 lieutenant.
Okay. You went all the way from the top of the country to the bottom and back.
Yeah. We was very poor, too, when we went to New York. I mean, it was making $15,000 a year and living in New York. I mean, it was difficult.
So
we
back
struggled,
then,
and
did they not have the cost of living raises implemented yet?
No, we struggled. But
yeah.
And then from there I went to Otisville as a GS11 lieutenant. But when I was in New York as a GS9 lieutenant, I was young,
mm-hmm.
and I thought I knew everything. And I truly thought the more I found wrong, the better leader I was.
Ah.
And it took me some time to figure out the more I found right and fixed the things that was wrong, then the better leader and the more cooperation I got from the staff.
Absolutely. That's a good leadership lesson.
But it took me a while to figure that out.
Yeah. So what did you think of leadership back then? Was the department understanding that you were leading at that lieutenant level, or were you just, a glorified supervisor? Or were they actually giving you guys leadership training?
Yeah, we did. And we used a lot of our leaders as an example, and some of it was good examples, and some of them were good examples as well, because you learned what not to do. If that made any sense.
Oh, it does. It does. It absolutely does. So where'd you go? You went from New York to Otisville. Now you're a GS11.
Yeah, exactly.
What was your next step?
11, I went to, where did I went back to Miami as a unit manager.
Okay.
So I spent about, I don't know, 4 years as a lieutenant.
Yeah.
And then I went again to Miami as a unit manager. And I had an opportunity to be the Correctional Services Administrator in D.C., but I turned it down simply because I didn't think it was appropriate. There was a lot of good captains out there that would have been better suited for it than me, and I just didn't think it was right to go in that direction.
Yeah. Interesting. So what was the differences that you started learning about with case management? I mean, that's a whole different part of prison work.
Well, the thing with leadership, you always try to hire people that are better at it than you are. And I had good case managers, and that's basically how you survive.
Mm-hmm.
By not thinking you know everything and listening to people.
Okay. So where'd you go from Miami? What was your next step?
I went to Marion Control unit manager.
Okay. At the time,
I
that
don't even
was,
think,
how old was that then? That was only about 15 years old then?
yeah, it was a tough job. Well, it was, but it wasn't. I mean, you had really, I mean, we had about, I don't know, 45 inmates in there, and all of them were in there for murdering other inmates or staff since they've been in prison. So, I mean, it was a pretty serious situation. And when you go into that situation, you better do right, or the staff would literally run you out of there. And
Yeah, absolutely.
but I got
So,
along well. I had half the union down there working with me, and we actually the staff did a good job, and we had a good time doing it. So, one of the things with leadership is getting people to do things because they want to do it, not because you tell them to do it.
right, right. So what year was this you were at Marion?
Probably 85, maybe 1985.
Okay. So this was after we lost the two officers down there.
Yeah, it was.
So,
I still had those inmates there, but
oh, I'm sure. Yep. Hoffman and Klutz were murdered by a couple of inmates there in, I think it was 1983. So where'd you go from Marion?
I went to associate warden in Latuna, and I was there for about 3 years.
Uh-huh.
And then from there I went back to Miami as associate warden. Obviously, I like Miami.
I guess. I'm surprised you didn't retire to
3 times
Miami.
there. Well, I would probably be living in Florida, but my family's here in Beaumont. When I come to Beaumont as warden, my family come
Okay.
and I enjoy the grandkids, and I mean it's a good place to live.
Absolutely. So, went to Miami, and then Beaumont was this was your final duty station?
No, I went from Miami to Duluth, Minnesota as a warden. And it was interesting because Pat Kane was the regional director.
Mm-hmm.
And he's probably one of the best that I ever worked for. And after I got a year in Duluth, I called Pat and I said, Pat, you got to get me out of here. I said, I don't do nothing. I said, and it's cold. And he said, where do you want to go? And I said, any place south. And so about 2 weeks later, he called me back and he said, well, I got some good news and bad news. And I says, what's the good news? He says, you're going south. I said, what's the bad news? He says, it's only to Oxford. So I ended up going from Duluth to Oxford.
Yeah.
And
so
then
you worked
from Oxford to Beaumont.
So you worked with Pat more than once, didn't you?
I'm sorry?
You worked with Pat more than once, Pat Cohane. He's kind of I don't know, an icon of the
No,
Federal
that was
Bureau.
Pat Payne was the.
Oh, my fault.
Oh yeah,
So,
Pat was.
so
Yeah,
tell me,
Pat Kane was the regional director. Now Pat Cohane, I worked for him twice,
okay,
and he was outstanding. I mean, he had it together. He was a correctional officer's warden, correctional officer's administrator.
mm-hmm,
And I learned a lot from him. He, I don't know, I used to tell everybody, which wasn't true. I said, Cohane, the only reason you got to where you're at because I taught you everything you know. And I'd say, okay.
absolutely. It's good stuff.
But I really, but no, I work with some very, very good people. Kathy Hawk,
Yeah,
director, Kathy Hawk Sawyer, I guess. But she was, as far as I was concerned, absolutely outstanding. I'd have walked through hell for her simply because I knew she'd figure out a way to get me back out.
right.
And and the union. I don't know what the union's like today, but the unions were very good. Getting along with the unions is about compromise. Giving a little and getting a little, on both sides.
Right.
And I don't know if I don't recall ever having a grievance filed on me. So, but it's you listen to people's issues, and either they're legit or they're BS, and you deal with it accordingly.
Right.
But we always got along, and sometimes we agreed to disagree.
Yeah.
But that's
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I think
It's okay as long as the communication.
absolutely. I think a lot of union management relations these days is kind of like the rest of the country. Everything's very divided and nobody's listening to each other. Everybody's talking, but nobody's listening. But that's just my personal opinion. I do agree with Kathy Hawk Sawyer. I got lucky when I went to D.C., and they brought her back for just less than a year to run the Bureau not too long ago. And so I actually got to work for her in Washington, D.C. for a little bit. So that was nice. She is a very good leader. And you're right. She does make you feel like she'll take care of you. I agree with that.
I started under Norman Carlson, and he was probably the best you could get as well. And but you could be very intimidated by him. He was a big guy. He spoke, and when he walked in an institution, he must have learned everybody's names as he walked, because he always recognized you by your name.
Right.
And but he was solid.
Yeah. Yeah. So
and when I was a correctional officer in Oxford, Charlie Fitton was the warden, and he was kind of a icon in the Bureau.
Yep.
And I never dreamed in 100 years I would be sitting at his desk someday. And if I told somebody that's what I would have wanted, they'd have probably laughed at me.
Right. Right. Tell me about your years as a warden. Some of the things that you were able to enact, and some of the maybe leadership things that you learned. Tell me a little about that.
Well, I always walked the compound.
Mm-hmm.
And 90% of the time, I walk by myself for a couple reasons. People will talk to you when you're by yourself. And another thing is, when you ask questions, people didn't know whether or not you already knew the answer. So, then you got pretty straight answers from people. You'd ask a question, the first thing that they think, well, does that SOB already know the answer, and he's just checking me out? And most of the time I already did know the answer. But, communication with staff, I mean, wardens, I guess, is important, but keep in mind, you go home at 4 o'clock Friday and don't come back until Monday, and that damn institution's still running. There's got to be a reason,
Mm-hmm.
and that reason is your staff. And, it's, again, leadership is about getting people to do things because they want to do it, not because a warden tells them to do it. And I think a lot of times today, first of all, still have tremendous respect for the Bureau of Prisons.
Absolutely.
It gave me a career. I would never be where I'm at had I not did a career in the Bureau of Prisons. I have total respect for it. As a warden, I had 5% of the inmate population that caused me problems, and I had 5% of the staff that caused me problems. And so I spent 95% of my time on 5% of the inmate population and 5% of the staff.
Yeah.
The other 95% of the inmate population wanted to do their time and go home, and the staff, 95%, wanted to do their shift and go home to their families. So, you spend a lot of time on that 5% on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you retired out of Beaumont, and
Yeah.
you weren't ready to leave corrections yet, so you started the creative corrections.
I'm still not.
Okay.
Right.
So tell me about what brought that about.
2002.
Yeah. What brought that about? Creative corrections, and
Well,
what were you?
I was
What?
a warden for private corrections in California,
Okay.
and I did not like California. And so my wife and I decided that we'd go someplace else. So I went to
Mm-hmm.
Las Vegas. I rented a house and went back to the job and resigned. And it was a good job. It was a good agency I was working for, but I just didn't like where I was at.
Right.
So I moved to Las Vegas and started creative corrections. And it's interesting because when I first started it, everybody said I would never be successful, and there was points at it where I didn't think I would be either. I got $35,000 in debt, and I was
Mm-hmm.
scared to death. I think the only reason I become successful in the business because I visited a bankruptcy attorney. And he told me how great bankruptcy was. And when I left, I thought, well, that crazy SOB, ain't no way I'm going to do that. I'm just going to work harder and speak to more people. And then we got our first contract with the Office of Detention Trustee doing audits. So, and it was interesting because the people I hired, I had to tell them that I can't pay you until I get paid.
Right.
And those same people are still with me today, 20 years later. And they're all retired Bureau of Prisons.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got 137 staff with the company, and probably 100 of them are retired from the Bureau of Prisons.
Yeah.
So
I don't think the general public, I think they have a perception that prisons run on their own and that nobody's watching what goes on. But prisons get audited on a regular basis by several different, whether it's PREA, whether it's their own agency, whether it's outside agencies. Tell me a little bit, just for the public, what is that process? What is that process, and what does it entail?
Our company actually does about 160 audits a year in correctional facilities throughout the United States. And the interesting part is our rule of thumb is call it like you see it. If it's good, call it that way. If it's not good, call it that way. And always try to give the customer a little bit more than what they pay for.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that gives us credibility, and it makes people want to call us back to do future audits. But the community is poorly educated on prisons. And I think prisons could do a better job in educating the community and getting them more involved. And It's crime is crazy today.
Mm-hmm.
And with our foundation, I'm giving it some thought to establishing groups with Teens Against Crime, because we say that teens sometimes has a negative influence on other teens.
Mm-hmm.
And my theory is that the majority of teens are good, and only a small percentage end up in a criminal justice system. So if we think that teens give negative vibes on other teens, why wouldn't we use that in the opposite direction and having Teens Against Crime and having
Mm-hmm.
that move forward? And I think that would have a potential of more educating the community. And reverse, I think a lot of inmates in prison are very regretful what they did. I mean, they think it was pretty stupid in the direction that they went in, and start groups like Convicts Against Crime,
Mm-hmm.
and use those or things of that nature to educate the community, because the community believes that when they put a person in prison, then they got rid of the problem. What they don't understand is the problem just started because that same individual is coming back to the same community they left for. And if people, employers, communities, if they're not willing to give them a chance for employment, then guess what? It's going to be a revolving door back to prison. And then it's, why hasn't prisons reformed this person? Well, prisons can try with their reentry programs, but without the assistance and without the education of the community, I don't think it's going to be all that successful. I think for the most part, prisons do a good job in reentry. I don't think they do a good job in educating the community. And I think that community involvement is very, very important.
Yes, I'll absolutely agree with that. We've spent so many years kind of hiding behind our fences and our walls, and we don't want people to know what goes on in there. And it's so important that the community understands the amount of resources that are being.
I did an interview a couple months ago with the New York Times on a particular state. And I must not have said anything that they liked because I didn't print anything I said. So, and a lot of the media is, they say their side of the story and not necessarily the facts.
Sure.
And but hell, I never even got mentioned in that article.
Right.
But, and it's because I didn't badmouth the state, which I would never do. I mean, if I thought something was terribly wrong, I would say it. But, being interviewed about issues that you don't necessarily know what the facts are, then I don't think that's appropriate to expound on that.
Right. Well, you mentioned your foundation, the Pitzer Family Foundation. Tell me some of how that started and what you guys are doing with that.
Well, our goal in the foundation is threefold. We try to give scholarships to kids who have parents in prison, and that's actually funded by inmates. Inmates have donated $245,000 to the foundation, and every penny of that goes to scholarships to their children.
Wow, that's great.
Now, and we also, in Southeast Texas area, assist parolees in getting them trained in a construction field. We have a partnership with Associated Builders and Contractors in various construction. And we currently have 85 individuals in that program. And then when they get out, or even before they get out, we assist them in job placement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty good way of educating the community too. And then we're also assisting inmates being released from prison and getting free health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
We're partnership with an insurance company out of South Carolina called Parks Insurance. And 9 times out of 10, most inmates have little or no resources when they get out of prison, so we can get them the insurance under those circumstances free of charge. And when they start making money, then they can buy their own insurance. But it's a good thing, and people are really taking advantage of it. One of the issues, what I never understood is some prisons, I mean, what is wrong with inmates supporting their own kids' education? I mean, it's not taxpayer money. It's free to the government. It gets them in school versus jail.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it just makes total sense. And we slowed down a lot in that particular area simply because of COVID.
Right.
So nothing was really happening in prison. So we're rebuilding again, but we need prisons to try to get involved. I don't take a salary from the foundation.
Right.
Believe it or not, my wife and I have contributed over $1 million to this foundation.
Oh, wow.
Because I've had a successful business. So, you give something back. So it's not a money-making operation for my family.
Sure.
But it just makes sense. I don't know. If we could get 10, 15% of America's inmate population in state and federal custody, donating $1 a month, less than the price of a candy bar, we could educate every kid out there that has a parent incarcerated.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got a call one time and asking me, why am I doing that for inmate kids? Why am I doing it for staff kids?
Mm-hmm.
And I just responded, well, that's a hell of a good idea. Why don't you do that? And I'll keep on doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Person never called me back again and never started that program. So,
right.
I mean, people can criticize a lot, and it's easy to criticize. It's hard to do.
Oh, absolutely.
So, I mean, that's kind of where I started with the foundation.
Yeah.
But we've given 190 scholarships to these kids. Every penny we get in goes out the door to scholarships.
Mm-hmm. And giving them a chance that their parents aren't, that's great. I'm a big proponent of inmates doing more for themselves, and we've gotten away from that over the years. When I first started with the state, inmates ran their own farms, made their own gardens, ran their own dairy. And then, later on you saw the factories come into the prison, and those inmates that were able to go to the factory, make decent money and be able to send some of that money home to their family, those were the inmates who were going to make it once they got out. They felt like they were connected with that family. They felt like they were, part of the solution. And we've taken that away from a lot of them.
Oh, yeah. You can get inmates to participate in anything you want them to participate in, if it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
A good example is when I was at AW in Latona. There was a police officer killed in the line of duty in El Paso. And they had a bid out to donations to buy bulletproof vests for police officers. So I thought, well, I'm going to get the inmates to participate in that. And when I approached them, they said, Pitzer, those MFers put us in here. Now you want them to buy bulletproof vests? I said, yeah. I said, if you got family out there and they get in trouble, who are they going to call? The Aryan Brotherhood or the Black Gangster Disciples or 911?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, if you're looking at it that way, we'll participate. And they donated $3,000 to buy bulletproof vests for police officers.
Wow.
And my point here is make sense and we'll participate.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Not everybody in prison is bad. Not everybody in the community is good. So you got to really create that balance there.
You do. So what's next for you? What's your next project? Getting the teens, talking to teens?
Well, I think that's a good possibility, working with the school to
Mm-hmm.
try to get that done. Of course, I don't have no authority with the prisons, but I would think that inmates would jump all over that.
Yeah.
And what positive publicity would that, I mean, it would be tremendous for the prisons
Mm-hmm.
and the inmates as part of educating the community.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I said, not everybody in there is bad. I mean, they screwed up when they went to prison. But I think we've made a lot of mistakes in the criminal justice system. You know,
Mm-hmm.
back in 1987, our politicians wanted to get tough on crime. So what did we do? We have mandatory minimum. Do 85% of your sentence. No
Mm-hmm.
parole. Well, we knew what that was going to do. It was going to just build the prison population tremendously. And that's what it did. But nobody asked us because it was a
Right.
political boondock. Now they see what occurred with that. Now they don't have the courage to correct their own mistake. And that's why our prison population is so high, is
Right.
because we come up with this, and it sounds great, we're getting tough on crime. Well, no, you're not. You're getting tough on the community because they're paying for all that stuff.
Mm.
And people need to go to prison. I don't dispute that. But there has to be some common sense someplace.
Yes.
I'm a pretty conservative person myself, but I like to consider myself conservative with common sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we could use a lot more of that in our government today, because this mandatory minimum 85%, no parole, I mean, that's serving no positive purpose.
Mm.
I do think there's such a thing as locking somebody up for too long. And I mean, there's some of them should never get out of prison.
Sure.
But probably 97% are, in fact, going to get out of prison. I don't know. That's my opinion. I guess I'm going to stick with it.
Well, I think it's a good opinion. So if people wanted to get a hold of you, or if they want to, get contact with the Pitzer Family Education Foundation, where can they reach out?
They can call my office at 409-861-2536, or they can go to our website at PFEFscholarships.org. That's PFEFscholarships.org. And we need more people involved. Actually, we need donations too, and you can do that on our website.
Mm-hmm.
Because every penny we get goes to our goals as a foundation.
Right, right.
So,
Well, I will put those that phone number and the contact information where they can contact you or donate, and I'll put that in the show notes. So if anybody's looking for that, just look below the podcast here, and you'll see that information. Well, I thank you a lot for being on the Prison Officer Podcast, Percy. Great conversation. Great hearing about what you're doing out there, and congratulations on the good that you're doing in the community. It's appreciated by everybody.
well, and I sincerely appreciate the opportunity for you to allow me to be on the podcast. It means a lot to me.
Oh, absolutely. I thank you, and I will talk at you soon. Have a great day.
Take care.
Before we go today, I'd like to take a minute to thank one of our sponsors. OMNI Real-Time Locating Systems is a company that I've been working closely with. I'm proud to be part of this innovative team that has developed the best real-time locating system on the market for your jail or prison. OMNI's PREA-compliant real-time monitoring technology is the very best way to track and record the locations and interactions of all inmates and assets through every inch of your correctional facility. Imagine getting an alarm the second an escape happens, or being able to send a medical response the second an inmate's heart rate drops. To learn more about OMNI, go to www.omnirtls.com. That's www.omnirtls.com. OMNI Real-Time Locating System is the powerful tool designed specially for today's modern correctional facilities. If you haven't done so, please take a moment to like my podcast, or better yet, hit the subscribe button down there so that you'll be notified when the next episode comes out. Have a great day.